let me go back briefly and just make sure that you got all the blanks. The last bullet on page 4 of the outline says the UCC has a different rule when the contract for goods is between two merchants. And then the next 3 blanks, the words are limits, materially, and then rejects. Those are the next 3 blanks, and that finishes out page 4. I want to go back and talk about acceptance and offer just a little bit more, because sometimes it's not really clear when an offer has been made. Have you ever joked with someone before? Hey, I'd pay you $1 million if you pulled a prank on that teacher or something, or if you did that, like things like that. A lot of times you joke a lot, and so sometimes it can be difficult to know when you've actually made an offer or when you haven't. There's a very famous case that we talk about in law school where this was the controversy, whether it was a serious offer or whether it wasn't. And this one was called Lucy versus Zimmer. Lucy, Lucy versus Zimmer. It was a case in Virginia from the 1950s. So what happened was Lucy and Zimmer had known each other for quite a while, 15 to 20 years. And Lucy had been wanting to buy Zimmer's farm. This farm had been in Zimmer's family a long time, had a lot of timber on it, lots of trees, beautiful farm, and Lucy had wanted to buy it. And Zimmer had always, laughed him off and never really took Lucy too seriously, to tell you the truth. Well, one night, Lucy came in Zimmer's restaurant. And Lucy, it looked like he had been drinking. I think he even had a bottle. He had been drinking. And he looked like, he wasn't really all there. And Zimmer and Lucy just started joking and laughing and talking. And they both were drinking. And at one point, Lucy said to Zimmer, "I bet you wouldn't take $50,000 for that place." Which $50,000 was actually a very reasonable price for the farm. "I bet you wouldn't take $50,000 for that place." Zimmer replied, "Yes, I would too, but you wouldn't give 50. And they kept going back and forth, back and forth. "Yes, I would give 50, but you wouldn't take 50. "Yes, I would take 50. So they eventually wrote out on a receipt, on the back of a receipt, and this is what they wrote: "We hereby agree to sell to W.O. Lucy the Ferguson farm complete for $50,000, title satisfactory to buyer," and it was signed by A.H. and Ida Zimmer. So not only did Mr. Zimmer sign it, but Mrs. Zimmer also signed it. And they actually had a couple of versions of the receipt. And one of the versions, didn't have one of the words there, so they redid it. And then Mrs. Zimmer hadn't signed it, so then Lucy wanted Mrs. Zimmer to sign it. And the whole time, Zimmer, at least what he told the court afterwards was, "Hey, I just thought we were messing around. We were just kind of joking. We were just, he was maybe a little intoxicated. Maybe I was too. We've been drinking, but Lucy didn't see it the same way. After this happened, Lucy came and said, "Here's the $50,000. I want the farm." And Zimmer's like, "No. That wasn't for real. I was just kind of joking." So the trial court actually found in Zimmer's favor, but then they appealed it to the Supreme Court of Virginia, the Supreme Court of Appeals of Virginia, and they found for Lucy. They said, even though Zimmer claimed that he was high as a Georgia pine and that the transaction was just a bunch of two doggone drunks bluffing to see who could talk the biggest and say the most, they said that was inconsistent with his attempt to testify in great detail as to what was said and what was done. So in other words, Zimmer said, "This is what happened first, then this is what happened, then we did this," very detailed. And they said, "Well, that's not really consistent with you saying that you were drunk." And they said the fact that y'all had, a couple of versions of the contract. You tore up one, that shows that you were thinking, you're trying to be careful. The fact that it's pretty clear in the contract what the terms are. That's another example that it looks like a serious, contract. And then the fact that, your wife signed it as well. Lucy wanted your wife to sign it and she signed it. And the court, in so many words, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. If it looks like an offer and it acts like an offer, it's an offer. This case is used as an example in law school that it doesn't matter whether you intended for something to be an offer or not. What matters is how a reasonable person would perceive your words and acts. So if a reasonable person would think, they got all the details in the contract, they both signed it, they talked about it for an hour, they came up with a fair price. It wasn't an absurd price, it was a fair price. Everything about the offer, a normal, reasonable person would have thought, yep, it looks reasonable. It doesn't matter whether you thought it was a joke or not. So courts and the law looks at the objective nature of what's going on, not at your subjective thoughts. So remember that. If you're joking about something, but it looks like it's real, and the other person is acting like it's real, then you might have made an offer unintentionally. So be careful, when you're doing that kind of thing. Okay, now we're going to talk about consideration. In addition to offer and acceptance, valid contracts also require consideration. Consideration is receipt of a legal benefit or the suffering of a legal detriment. Detriment, D-E-T-R-I-M-E-N-T. So receipt of a legal benefit or suffering of a legal detriment. So the benefit part is easy to understand. If I promise to paint your house, the consideration is, the $1,000 I'm going to get from you, and then me painting your house. That's the consideration. So it's a legal benefit. Both sides actually kind of get a legal benefit there. But it can also be the suffering of a legal detriment. And that is a little bit harder to understand. I think the best way to understand that is with another famous case. This is a case called Hammer versus Sidway from 1891. So we're talking over 120 years ago. This case was decided. Hammer versus Sidway. And in Hammer versus Sidway, it was a story that even started before that. In 1869, William Story Sr. Made a promise to his nephew, William Story II. And the promise was, if you refrain from drinking alcohol, using tobacco, and playing billiards and cards for money until you reach the age of 21, the uncle would pay him $5,000. And that's worth about $75,000 today. So he would pay him $5,000 if he would refrain from drinking, smoking, and playing cards and billiards for money, for gambling, in other words. So the nephew, who indulged occasionally in these vices, agreed to refrain from them and did so for the next 6 years. Following his 21st birthday, in 1875, the nephew wrote to his uncle and said, "Hey, I did it. For the last 6 years, I didn't drink, didn't smoke. I did everything you asked me to do." And he said, "I'm now entitled to the $5,000 you promised me." The uncle sent him a letter saying, "Yep, you are. You shall have the $5,000, but I'm going to keep it for a while in the bank, and you should just consider it your money on interest." It's just it's your money, but it's on interest. Well, the uncle passed away about 12 years later, and the money was still in the bank. The uncle's executor refused to pay the nephew the $5,000. So the nephew sued. Well, the executor said there wasn't consideration. They said, what did the nephew give to the uncle? He didn't really give anything. And in fact, everything that he did was actually good for the nephew. So that's not a benefit for the uncle. But the court said, otherwise. The court said that the promisee, that was the nephew, the promisee used tobacco, occasionally drank liquor, and he had a legal right to do so. So they're saying that before this deal, the nephew, I guess the minimum ages for some of these things was different back then, but they said before this deal that the nephew had a right to do those things. But after this deal, he gave up his right to do certain things. And the court said that right he abandoned for a period of years upon the strength of the promise of the testator. That was his uncle, the testator. The testator is someone who makes a will. That such forbearance he would give him, that for such forbearance he would give them $5,000. We need not speculate on the effort which may have been required to give up the use of those stimulants. So in other words, the court says it might have been hard to give up those things. But the fact is he had a legal right to do them and he chose not to. It is sufficient that he restricted his legal freedom of action within certain prescribed limits upon the faith of his uncle's agreement. So sometimes consideration is a benefit, sometimes it's suffering of a legal detriment. So in the case of Hammer versus Sidway, the consideration was giving up something that nephew had a right to indulge in. He suffered a legal detriment, and that was enough. So that is also consideration. Consideration must be bargained for. Okay? So you both have to agree what the consideration is. Prior consideration is no consideration. Prior consideration is no consideration. A party to an agreement does not give consideration by promising to do something that he or she is already obligated to do. There was a famous case of some fishermen. And these fishermen went out on the ocean, and before they came back, they still had a few more weeks to go. They sent word to the ship's owners, and they said, look, the conditions out here are worse than we expected. It's a lot harder. So we demand more money, or we're not doing any more fishing, or we're going to stop right now. Well, for the owner, that was huge, because they couldn't just send another boat out there, get another crew, and fulfill what they needed to get done. So they said, okay, fine, we'll give you more money. Well, when the boat finally docked and the fishermen came out there for their pay, the boat owners gave them the original agreed on amount. And the court, and of course, the employees sued, but the court said, look, you agreed to go out there and fish for this amount of time and to do this, that, and the other. And so when you told them later that you weren't going to do that, there was no new consideration for this increase in pay because you were already on the hook. You were already obligated to do that. Okay? So the prior consideration, in other words, doing what you had already promised to do, there was no consideration. If I am promised to pay you $1,000, you promised to pay my house, halfway through you say, hey, this paint is a lot more expensive than I knew. In fact, the paint alone is going to cost more than $1,000. And I say, hey, that's okay, and then you say, I'm not going to paint your house anymore unless you give me $2,000. Okay? That's what you say. And I say, okay, fine, I'll give you $2,000. Once you're finished painting, if I only give you $1,000, there's nothing you can do about it because you had already promised to paint the house. You're not doing anything new other than what you had already promised to do. So courts won't enforce a contract if it doesn't have new consideration. If the contract changed midway through and there's not new consideration, like for instance, new consideration might be, hey, you know what, the paint's a lot more expensive. I will paint your house, but I'll also mow your yard for $2,000. And if I said, okay, sure, I agree to that, there was new consideration. Now you're not only painting my house, but you're also mowing my yard. So a court would enforce that kind of change to a contract because there's now new consideration, additional consideration to justify the change from $1,000 to $2,000. And I think I already read this, but just in case, the blank under I, a party to an agreement does not give consideration by promising to do something that he or she is already obligated to do. Options require consideration. Options. So if you want someone to, say, hold an offer open for a certain period of time, or an option for you to be the one to accept that particular offer, say for a house. Beautiful house, you think you want it, but you're not willing to, get the loan just yet for it, but you don't want anyone else to get the house for you, from you. You might ask for an option. Hey, I'll give you $1,000 if you give me the option to buy this house for, say, the next 30 days. So in that case, I give the money, consideration, and you promise to allow me to accept the original offer for 30 days, and he wouldn't sell it to someone else. Okay? So options require consideration. Although in the UCC is a little different, but I'm not going to go there. Y'all can look at that in your book if you're interested in the difference for the UCC. If no consideration is given, courts will sometimes invoke the doctrine of promissory estoppel. Promissory estoppel, to create an enforceable agreement. And this is similar to quasi-contract. Promissory estoppel can be thought of as a substitute for consideration. The doctrine arises when a promisee justifiably relies on a promissor's promise to his or her economic injury. An example I wanted to give you was, imagine McDonald's comes to you. And let's say that you built cabinets already, you had a going business of building cabinets, and McDonald's came to you and they said, hey, we really like the quality of your work, but instead of building cabinets, we think you'd be better at making hamburger buns, baking hamburger buns. We just think you have good systems, you're a good manager. And they say, what we'd like you to do is, sell all your carpentry stuff, get a large loan from the bank to get all this new baking equipment, shut down your carpentry business, start getting ready to bake all these buns because we want you to be our exclusive baker, all right? And we want to start this up in a couple months. Well, has McDonald's made you an offer? Not really. They haven't said how much they're going to give you. They haven't, there was nothing in writing. They weren't all that specific, maybe as to how they should be, like how much, they were going to buy from you, or, the terms weren't all there. So a court may not think of that as an offer. However, you sell everything that you have regarding your carpentry business. You put a going out of business sign up, so all of your customers that were coming to you for carpentry business, they now go to somewhere else. You get a loan from the bank for $1 million to get all the baking equipment and the ovens and everything that you need, and maybe you have to hire some more people because you're ready to go. Because you took McDonald's on their word that, they told me that I was going to be their exclusive baker. They told me that, right? So in that case, everything that you did, you relied on their promise, and it was to your economic injury. So if McDonald's came back later and said, you know what, we changed our mind, we're going to go with Mrs. Baird's Bread, a company that's been in business a long time, we're not going to use you. Well, you relied on their promise to your economic injury. Now you're out all this money for all this baking equipment that you can't use. You've paid for extra staff, and now, what are they going to do for you? Your former customers, your cabinet customers, they've already gone on to someone else. So you have been out a lot of money because of that promise. So in a case like that, everything that you did in reliance on that, that's considered promissory estoppel. And McDonald's would be considered to have, McDonald's is now estopped. That's the way it's called. They are now estopped from saying that there was no contract. Because now McDonald's needs to do something to make it right. Because you were out all of this money and all of this time and energy in your business, your old business, because you relied on their promise. So be careful when you're making promises to other people. Because if they rely on it and it hurts them, you change your mind or something, then a court might say that you have a contract, even though you didn't think you had a contract yet. But if someone relies on one of your promises and it hurts them, then you might have to make it right.